You are been constantly manipulated. Yes, not obviously, not dramatically, not in the way that movies portray manipulation with the scheming villain and the visible trap, and the moment of revelation where the victim suddenly sees the strings that were being pulled. That version does not exist in real life. The real version is quieter, subtler, more comfortable than you expect it to be. The real version feels like a normal conversation, like a reasonable request, like the natural flow of a relationship where one person seems to care about you, and you have no specific reason to question whether the caring is genuine. You have been manipulated by people who looked you in the eyes and seemed warm, by people who did favors you did not ask for, and who made you feel seen in ways that felt real in the moment, by people who knew exactly what to say to produce the exact emotional response they needed from you, and who delivered it with a naturalness that made the delivery invisible. And the cost of not seeing it, the slow, compounding, daily cost of operating inside a dynamic where someone else's agenda is shaping your decisions without your awareness, is something you have been paying for longer than you know. Here is what that cost looks like. You say yes to things you did not want to say yes to, and you cannot quite explain why the refusal felt impossible. You leave conversations feeling diminished in a way you cannot articulate. Not hurt, not angry, just somehow less than you were before the conversation started. You make adjustments to your behavior that serve someone else's comfort without ever having been asked directly to make them. You carry guilt about things that, when you examine them clearly, you are not actually guilty of. You doubt your own perception of situations that, before the doubt arrived, you were entirely clear about. Each of these experiences individually seems small. Each one has a reasonable explanation that does not involve manipulation. And that is precisely why the manipulation works, because it operates below the threshold of what feels like manipulation. It operates in the space where reasonable explanations are available for every individual moment, and the pattern, the consistent repeating, structurally deliberate pattern, is only visible from a distance that the person inside the dynamic never gets to access. Machiavelli spent 15 years watching this pattern operate at the highest levels of political power in Renaissance Italy. He sat across the table from men who had refined this skill to the point where entire political alliances were constructed and dismantled through conversations that looked from the outside like nothing more than friendly exchanges between reasonable people. He documented with the clinical precision of someone who had been on both sides of the dynamic that the most effective manipulation never feels like manipulation to the person experiencing it. It feels like ordinary life, and the person being manipulated does not feel manipulated. They feel confused, they feel tired, they feel like something is off without being able to name what the something is. That confusion, that specific, chronic, low-grade uncertainty about what is actually happening in a relationship that seems fine on the surface, is the signature of secret manipulation, and the behaviors that produce it are the subject of this video. 7 behaviors, 7 specific, observable, immediately recognizable tells that the person who is secretly manipulating you cannot fully hide, no matter how skilled they are. By the end of this video, you will see things in your existing relationships that you have never seen before, not because the things were not there, because you did not know what to look for. If you are ready to see what has been operating in the background of your life without your awareness, comment the words, "I see it now." Like this video because every like puts it in front of someone who is still inside the pattern without knowing it. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, and drop your location and the time right now. This community is real, and right now it matters who is here. Behavior 1. They study your reactions before they ever need something from you. The information gathering phase is always disguised as casual interest. Let me tell you why this behavior is the first one in the video, and why recognizing it changes everything about how you read the people around you. The secret manipulator does not improvise, they prepare. And the preparation does not look like preparation. It looks like warmth. It looks like genuine curiosity about who you are. It looks like the kind of interested, attentive, emotionally engaged conversation that most people interpret as friendship forming. And sometimes, it is friendship forming. That is what makes this so difficult to detect. The same behaviors that signal genuine interest also signal information gathering. The difference is not in what the person does, it is in what they do with what they gather. Machiavelli observed this with the specificity of a man who had watched it cost capable people everything they had built. He documented that the most effective political operators in the courts of Florence never began their maneuvering with the maneuver itself. They began with the study, the casual conversations, the interested questions. The warm, apparently genuine curiosity about what the target valued, what they feared, what made them proud, and what made them insecure. Each piece of information, gathered in the comfortable atmosphere of what felt like a deepening friendship, was filed. Not maliciously, in most cases, efficiently. And the file, once it was complete enough to be useful, became the blueprint for every subsequent move the manipulator would make. Here is what this looks like in your actual life. Someone you have known for a while, a colleague, a friend, a person in your social circle, asks you questions that feel like connection. How are you really doing? What has been keeping you up at night? What is the thing you are most worried about right now? The questions feel caring, and maybe they are. But here is the tell that separates genuine interest from strategic gathering. The genuine friend asks, and then sits with your answer. They respond to the emotional content. They are present with what you shared. The strategic gatherer asks, receives, and then asks the next question. The gathering has a pace to it that is slightly faster than genuine emotional engagement would produce. The questions arrive with a specificity that feels like curiosity, but functions like an interview. And the information you provide, your fears, your insecurities, your priorities, your emotional triggers, goes into a file that you did not know was being assembled. Most people never notice this, because the gathering feels like the best part of a new or deepening relationship. It feels like being seen, being known, being valued enough to be asked. Machiavelli would tell you to watch not what they ask, but what they do with what you answered. If the information surfaces later, in a moment of pressure, in a conversation where your vulnerability is referenced at a moment that serves the other person's agenda, in the specific and targeted application of something you shared in confidence, being used as a tool, then the gathering was the gathering, and the friendship was the cover. Let me give you a specific scenario that will make this land. You start a new role and a colleague immediately takes an interest in you. They invite you to lunch. They ask about your background, your goals, your previous experiences. They ask what frustrates you about professional environments. They ask what you value most in a working relationship. Each question feels like the natural getting-to-know-you exchange of two colleagues building rapport, and maybe it is. But 6 weeks later, when a disagreement arises about a project direction, this same colleague references with striking accuracy the specific frustration you mentioned in that early lunch conversation. They position their argument in a way that directly addresses the value you said you prioritized. They frame the disagreement in the exact terms that they know, because you told them, would be most persuasive to you. Your own words, spoken in a moment of genuine openness, have become the precise tools being used to move you in a direction you might not have chosen if the tools had not been so perfectly calibrated. Machiavelli would never share the calibration data before the relationship had been tested by time and difficulty. Here is what he would do instead. He would engage warmly. He would participate in the getting to know you exchange with genuine interest. But the information he offered would be the managed version, the version that serves the relationship without providing the operational data that could be used as leverage. The fears he would share would be the non-critical ones. The values he would name would be the general ones. The specific, actionable pressure point data would be held in reserve until the relationship had demonstrated, through consistent behavior across multiple contexts and challenges, that it was safe to release. Comment I watch what follows the warmth if you just saw something in an existing relationship that you had not named before today. Behavior 2. They give you exactly what you need to hear right before they take something you were not prepared to give. My friend, this is the behavior that the most sophisticated manipulators in your life have mastered so completely that you have probably never connected the giving and the taking as two parts of the same move. But they are. They are always two parts of the same move, and recognizing that they are changes how you evaluate every moment of generosity, warmth, and apparent care that arrives from a person whose pattern you have not yet fully mapped. Machiavelli documented this with a precision that suggests he had been on the receiving end of it enough times to see the mechanism clearly before he saw it in others. He wrote about how the most effective political alliances were formed not through negotiation, but through the strategic delivery of what the other party needed most: validation, support, resources, the specific kind of recognition that was most valued at exactly the moment before a request was made that would have been refused without the delivery that preceded it. The generosity was not generosity, it was an investment, and the return on the investment was the compliance that the generosity had made psychologically impossible to withhold. Here's what this looks like in your life. Someone does something genuinely kind for you, something that lands exactly where you needed it to land. The timing is right, the delivery is warm. The feeling it produces, being supported, being valued, being cared about, is real. And then within days or sometimes hours, a request arrives. A request that, under normal circumstances, you would have declined or at least paused before answering. But the request does not arrive under normal circumstances. It arrives in the afterglow of the generosity. It arrives when the felt sense of having been given something is still warm in the body. And the refusal, which would have been straightforward in any other context, now feels like ingratitude, like taking without giving back, like the kind of cold, transactional behavior that the generous person clearly does not deserve. Here is the tell. Genuine generosity does not have a timing correlation with requests. It arrives because it arrives. It is not positioned before something is needed from you. It is not calibrated to produce the emotional state that makes your compliance feel obligatory. When you notice the correlation, when you see that the warmest moments in a relationship tend to precede the moments where something is asked of you, you are seeing the mechanism. And the mechanism, once seen, cannot unseen itself. Machiavelli would tell you this about the behavior. Most people cannot see it because the warmth is real. The manipulator who gives you what you need before taking what they want is not performing warmth they do not feel. Many of them feel it genuinely. The warmth is not the lie. The timing is the lie. The placement of the warmth immediately before the extraction is the strategic component. And the person who can distinguish between warmth that arrives because it is felt and warmth that arrives because it is positioned has developed a form of perceptual clarity that most people never achieve. Let me give you a specific way to test this, starting this week. The next time someone in your life does something generous for you, something warm, something that lands well, something that makes you feel valued and cared about, note the date. Write it down somewhere, private, and then watch what follows within the next 72 hours. If nothing follows, if the generosity was complete in itself, and no request or expectation surfaces in the days after you are with someone whose giving is genuine, but if a request arrives within that window, a favor asked, a boundary pushed, an accommodation expected, then the generosity and the request are two parts of the same move. And seeing them as two parts of the same move lets you evaluate the request on its actual merits, rather than through the fog of obligation the generosity created. Machiavelli would tell you something very direct about this. He would say, the person who gives in order to take is not giving, they are investing. And an investment expects a return. When you recognize the giving as an investment rather than a gift, you are free to evaluate the expected return on its actual value, rather than accepting it automatically out of the felt obligation that the investment was designed to produce. That freedom, the freedom to evaluate rather than comply, is what the manipulator's generosity is specifically designed to prevent. And the moment you reclaim it is the moment the obligation machine stops working. Comment, I track the timing of the giving, if this just illuminated a pattern you had been experiencing without recognizing the structure underneath it. Behavior 3. They remember your vulnerabilities with more precision than they remember your victories. Before I get into this one, I need you to sit with something uncomfortable. Think about the person in your life who seems to know you best. The one who remembers everything, who recalls the specific thing you said 3 months ago in a moment of openness. Who can reference, with striking accuracy, the fear you mentioned once, the insecurity you disclosed in confidence, the thing that happened to you years ago that still shapes how you move through certain situations. That memory feels like love. It feels like being known at a level that most people never reach. And sometimes it is exactly that. But here is the tell that separates the person who remembers because they care from the person who remembers because the information is useful. What do they remember most precisely? The person who genuinely cares remembers your victories with the same precision they remember your pain. They recall the thing you built with the same vividness they recall the thing that broke. Their memory of you is balanced, a full picture that includes the strong and the vulnerable in proportions that reflect who you actually are. The person who is secretly manipulating you remembers the vulnerabilities with disproportionate precision. The fears, the insecurities, the soft points, the specific emotional triggers that produce the specific emotional responses that serve their agenda. They remember these things, not because they are bad people, but because these are the pieces of information that have operational value. The victories do not produce compliance. The vulnerabilities do. Machiavelli observed this in the courts of Florence with the detached clarity of someone who had learned to distinguish between allies who knew him and operators who had studied him. He documented that the most dangerous people in any political environment were not the ones who knew the most about a rival's strengths. They were the ones who knew the most about a rival's vulnerabilities. Because strengths are defenses. They are the parts of a person's architecture that are designed to hold weight. Vulnerabilities are the parts that are not. And the person who has mapped the parts that are not designed to hold weight knows exactly where to apply pressure when pressure is needed. Here is your practice. Think about the person in your life who seems to know you most intimately, and ask yourself, when they reference what they know about me, is the reference balanced or weighted? Do they recall my achievements and my struggles with equal vividness, or do the struggles seem to surface with more frequency and more precision than the achievements? If the answer is that the vulnerabilities are disproportionately remembered, you are not being loved for your wholeness. You are being studied for your soft points. And the study, however warm it feels in the moment of the remembering, is the preparation for the moment when the soft point gets pressed. Let me give you a specific way to test this in a relationship you are currently navigating. Over the next 2 weeks, share 2 things with the person you are evaluating. 1 vulnerable thing and 1 strong thing. A fear and an achievement. A struggle and a success. Then wait. Watch which one resurfaces in subsequent conversations. Watch which one is referenced with more precision and more frequency. Watch which one seems to have been stored with more care. If the achievement and the vulnerability resurface with equal weight, you are with someone who sees you fully. If the vulnerability resurfaces more frequently, with more precision, and in contexts where its reference serves the other person's position rather than your well-being, you are being studied rather than loved. And the distinction between being studied and being loved is the distinction that will determine whether this relationship builds you or slowly dismantles you. Machiavelli would tell you this: the person who remembers your wounds is not necessarily the person who wants to heal them. Sometimes they are the person who is marking where the armor is thinnest. Not for today. For the day when the pressure needs to be applied, and the pressure needs to land somewhere that does not have the protection that the rest of you carries. That day may never come. But the person who has marked the thin spots is prepared for it in a way that the person who has not marked them is not. And preparation, as Machiavelli documented across every political case he ever studied, is the thing that determines outcomes. The prepared person wins. The unprepared person wonders what happened. Do not let someone else prepare against your own vulnerability using information you gave them voluntarily. Comment, I notice what they remember most, if this just reframed how you see the memory of someone in your life. Behavior 4. They create small obligations early. The favors you did not ask for that become the debts you cannot refuse. My friend, let me tell you why this behavior is one of the most invisible and most effective tools in any manipulator's approach. You did not ask for the favor. That is the key. You did not request it. You did not need it. It arrived unsolicited, and it arrived with warmth and generosity and the specific quality of someone who is just the kind of person who does things like this. The person who brings something without being asked. The person who shows up without being invited. The person who offers help before the need has been expressed. Each of these gestures feels like kindness, and in many relationships, it is kindness. But the specific observable behavior that separates genuine kindness from the construction of an obligation is what happens after the gesture. Genuine kindness does not create a ledger. The person who gives genuinely does not reference the giving later. The giving was complete in itself. It was not an investment. It was not a deposit into an account that will be drawn from at a future date. It was simply a gift. The manipulator's unsolicited kindness creates a ledger that the manipulator maintains, and the recipient does not know exists until the moment when the ledger is referenced, usually not directly. Usually through the subtle communication of "I have done so much for you," delivered not in words but in tone and the specific quality of expectation that accompanies the next request, in the implication that the history of unsolicited generosity has earned something that the recipient is now obligated to provide. Machiavelli documented this mechanism in political alliances with the precision of someone who had watched it construct and dismantle entire relationships between nations. He observed that the most effective way to create a sense of obligation in another party was not to negotiate the obligation openly, which would allow the other party to evaluate and potentially decline it, but to deliver unsolicited benefits that accumulated into a sense of debt that the recipient had never consciously agreed to but could not deny the existence of. The debt was real, the services had been rendered, the generosity had been genuine in form if not in intention, and the recipient, when the moment of extraction arrived, found themselves in the specific psychological position of being unable to refuse without appearing ungrateful for the history of giving that preceded the ask. Here is how you identify this in your own life. Think about the relationships where you feel a persistent sense of owing, where the other person has done things for you, many things, freely and without being asked, and where the accumulation of those things has created a felt obligation that you cannot articulate clearly, but that governs how you respond to their requests. Ask yourself, did I ask for any of this? Was the giving negotiated, or was it delivered? And is the felt obligation proportional to what was actually given? Or has the obligation grown larger than the gift because the gift was designed to produce it? Machiavelli would tell you this very directly. The person who gives without being asked, and then expects without having stated the expectation, is operating the most sophisticated obligation machine available in any human relationship. The machine runs on your goodness. It depends on the specific quality of your character that makes refusing a generous person feel cruel. And the person operating the machine knows that quality exists in you because they studied UC Behavior 1 before they began giving. Let me tell you something about this behavior that connects it to everything Machiavelli understood about how obligations operate in human relationships. Most people believe that obligations are created by agreements, by explicit exchanges where both parties negotiate the terms and consent to the arrangement. Machiavelli would look at that belief and say, that is how obligations are supposed to work. That is not how they actually work. In practice, the most powerful obligations are the ones that were never negotiated, that were never explicitly consented to, that were constructed through the one-sided delivery of benefits that the recipient never asked for but cannot deny having received. Here is why this is so effective and so difficult to resist. The person who received the unsolicited benefit genuinely did receive something. The favor was real, the help was real, the generosity was real in form, even if it was strategic in function. And the social contract, the deeply wired, culturally reinforced expectation of reciprocity that governs how human beings relate to one another, says that receiving creates an obligation to return. The manipulator did not invent the social contract. They are simply operating it. They are using the felt need to reciprocate a mechanism your own psychology provides as the engine that produces compliance, without ever asking for it directly. Machiavelli would never accept an unsolicited benefit without evaluating the potential cost of the obligation it might create. He would receive the generosity warmly, he would express genuine gratitude, and then he would hold the reciprocity in his own hands rather than letting it be activated on someone else's timeline. He would decide when and how and whether to return the favor, rather than feeling the automatic pull of obligation that the unsolicited giving was designed to install. That holding that deliberate choice to manage the reciprocity rather than be managed by it is the difference between the person who is controlled through obligation and the person who is free from it. Comment: I did not ask for the dead if you just saw the mechanism underneath someone's generosity for the first time. Halfway through this video, I want to be direct with you. If these 4 behaviors have been naming things that exist in your life right now, things you felt but could not articulate, dynamics you sensed but could not prove, then you need the final 3 behaviors more than anything that came before. Behaviors 5 through 7 are where the manipulation becomes most invisible and most costly. Subscribe right now, hit the notification bell, stay. Behavior 5. They shift the emotional temperature of every room they enter to serve the outcome they are building toward. Let me tell you something about this behavior that will change how you read social environments permanently. The secret manipulator does not just participate in the emotional atmosphere of a room. They adjust it deliberately, in ways that are invisible to most people, because the adjustment happens through tone, pace, energy, and the specific quality of emotional output that the manipulator has learned to calibrate based on what they need the room to feel in order to produce the outcome they are building toward. Machiavelli observed this in the courts of Florence with the fascination of someone who appreciated the skill even as he documented its dangers. He wrote about courtiers who could enter a room and within minutes shift the energy of the entire gathering toward the emotional state that served their agenda. Need the room to feel urgent. They arrive with urgency in their body. Need the room to feel cautious. They introduce doubt through the specific quality of concern that they project. Need the room to feel comfortable enough to make a decision that they would not make under careful scrutiny. They bring warmth, ease, and the specific kind of reassurance that lowers the room's analytical guard. Here is the tell. Most people's emotional energy in a room is reactive. They enter and adapt to the existing atmosphere. The manipulator's energy is directive. They enter and the atmosphere adapts to them, not because they are the loudest or the most dramatic, because they have learned, through years of practice, to emit the specific emotional frequency that produces the state they need the room to be in. Watch for the person whose emotional energy seems to lead rather than follow. The person in whose presence the room consistently ends up in a particular emotional state that serves a particular outcome. That consistency is not coincidence. It is calibration. And calibration, once you see it, is unmistakable. Machiavelli would tell you to watch the room's emotional temperature before and after a specific person enters it. If the temperature consistently shifts in a direction that serves that person's interests, if the room becomes more cooperative when they need cooperation, more cautious when they need caution, more urgent when they need fast decisions, you are watching the calibration in action. And the calibration, once identified, loses its power, because a room that understands it is being tuned stops responding to the tuning. The awareness is the defense. Let me give you a specific practice that will sharpen your ability to detect this. The next time you are in a group setting where the person you suspect of this behavior is present, check the room's emotional state twice. Once when the person is not present, once after they arrive. Note the difference. Not the content of what changed, the feel of what changed. Is the room more tense, more relaxed, more urgent, more cautious, more cooperative? Whatever the shift is, ask yourself, does the direction of the shift serve the person who just entered? If the room consistently moves in the direction of that person's agenda after they arrive, you are watching calibration, not personality, not charisma, calibration. And calibration can be beautiful. The leader who calms a panicked room is calibrating. The friend who brings warmth to a cold gathering is calibrating. The question is not whether the calibration is happening, it is whether the calibration consistently serves the calibrator's interests at the expense of everyone else's clarity. Machiavelli would tell you that the ability to shift the emotional temperature of a room is one of the most powerful social skills a human being can develop. He admired it. He documented it with respect. But he also documented the specific danger of this skill when it is used by someone whose agenda is not aligned with your well-being. Because the room that has been emotionally calibrated to serve someone else's outcome is a room where your own judgment is being affected without your awareness. The warmth feels real, the urgency feels real, the cooperation feels voluntary. And all of those feelings are operating in service of an outcome you did not choose, and may not have chosen if the emotional atmosphere had not been adjusted before you were asked to decide. Comment: I feel the temperature shift if you just recognize someone who does this in your professional or personal environment. Behavior 6. They never confront you directly. The pressure always arrives through implication, suggestion, and the specific tone that carries an accusation the words themselves do not state. My friend, this behavior is the one that causes the most psychological damage over time, and I need you to hear why. Direct confrontation, however uncomfortable, is something you can respond to. Someone says, "I am angry about what you did," and you can engage with the anger. You can address it. You can agree or disagree or explain or set a boundary. The confrontation has a shape. It has content. It gives you something to work with. The covert manipulator never gives you that. They never say the thing directly. They say things around it. They imply, they suggest. They use a tone that carries the full weight of an accusation, while the actual words, if transcribed and read on paper, would seem entirely innocent. And that gap between the tone and the words, between what was communicated and what was technically said, is the space where the manipulation does its most destructive work. Because you cannot address what was not said, you cannot push back against an implication that the person will deny having made. You cannot defend yourself against a tone that was somehow hostile, while the words were somehow neutral. The covert manipulator has created a dynamic where the pressure is real, and the source of the pressure is invisible. And the invisibility is the point, because invisible pressure cannot be confronted without the confronter appearing to have imagined it. And appearing to have imagined it being characterized as too sensitive, too reactive, too prone to reading things into situations that were perfectly innocent, is itself a form of the manipulation. Machiavelli documented this technique across every political court he ever worked in. He observed that the most effective operators never delivered their pressure through overt means. They delivered it through the specific, ambiguous, deniable communication that left the recipient certain of the message and unable to prove it was sent. He called this the art of the fox, the ability to achieve through indirection what the lion achieves through force. And the fox, Machiavelli noted with a kind of professional admiration, almost always outperformed the lion because the fox's moves could not be identified as moves. Here is your practice. The next time you leave a conversation feeling diminished, pressured, or destabilized in a way you cannot quite name, stop and ask yourself, what was said versus what was communicated? If the words, taken at face value, were neutral, but the feeling they produced was anything but neutral, you have just experienced covert pressure. The gap between the words and the feeling is the manipulation, and the person who can identify that gap in real time is the person who can no longer be controlled by it. Because once the gap is visible, the person creating it can no longer maintain the deniability that the gap depends on. You see the implication, you see the tone, you see the specific, practiced, carefully calibrated pressure that was designed to move you without leaving fingerprints, and the seeing is the end of its power. Let me give you a specific example that will make this immediately recognizable. You are in a conversation with someone and they say something like, "No, of course I understand why you would feel that way." And the words, on paper, are supportive, but the tone, the slight emphasis on "of course," the barely perceptible pause before "understand," The specific quality of the delivery that communicates without stating that what you are feeling is an overreaction to something that a more reasonable person would have handled differently. The words said, "I support you." The tone said, "I am tolerating you." And the gap between those two messages, the gap that you felt in your body but could not articulate with your mind, is the covert pressure in action. Here is what Machiavelli would tell you about this gap. He would say, the person who creates the gap between words and tone is the person who has learned to operate in the space where accountability cannot reach them. Because if you challenge the tone, they reference the words. If you name the feeling, they point to the content. And the content, taken at face value, is innocent. The pressure that you felt was real, but the evidence of it is invisible. And invisible evidence cannot be presented in any confrontation without the presenter looking like the person who imagined it. The defense is not confrontation. The defense is recognition. When you feel the gap when the words say one thing and the feeling says another, stop trying to figure out which one is true. They are both true. The words are what the person is willing to be held accountable for. The tone is what the person is actually communicating. And the actual communication, the one that lives in the tone rather than the words, is the one you should be responding to internally, even as you remain composed externally. See it, name it inside yourself, and let the naming inform every subsequent decision you make about how much access this person deserves to the parts of you that the covert pressure was aimed at. Comment, "I hear the tone behind the words," if you have been feeling the pressure without being able to prove the source. Behavior 7. They make you feel like the problem for noticing the pattern. The moment you name it is the moment they make you doubt your own perception. This is the last behavior, and it is the most dangerous one in this entire video, because this is the behavior that keeps all the other behaviors in place. This is the lock on the door. This is the mechanism that ensures the pattern continues, even after you have begun to see it. Because the moment you see it, the moment the fog starts to clear, and the specific behaviors start becoming recognizable, and the pattern starts forming in your awareness, with enough clarity that you consider naming it out loud, the manipulator does, something that resets the entire system. They make you feel crazy for seeing it. Not obviously, not with the words, "you are crazy," with something more precise and more devastating than that. With concern, with the gentle, apparently caring suggestion that maybe you are overthinking this, that maybe you are stressed and it is affecting how you are reading the situation, that maybe you are projecting something onto the relationship that says more about you than it says about them. The concern is warm, the tone is kind, and the message underneath the warmth and the kindness is clear. Your perception is the problem, not the behavior you are perceiving, your perception of it. Machiavelli would recognize this instantly as the most sophisticated tool in any manipulator's arsenal. He documented that the rulers who were most difficult to challenge were the ones who had mastered the art of reframing any observation of their behavior as a deficiency in the observer. The advisor who noticed the manipulation was characterized as paranoid. The ally who questioned the loyalty was characterized as ungrateful. The person who saw the pattern was told, gently and with apparent care, that the pattern was a product of their own anxiety rather than a feature of the dynamic they were accurately observing. Here is what you need to carry out of this video more than anything else. If you see a pattern, if the behaviors described in this video are present and recognizable and consistent in a specific relationship, and the person you see the pattern in makes you feel like the problem for seeing it, that response is not evidence that you are wrong. That response is the 7th behavior. It is the final and most important tell, because the person who is genuinely not manipulating you does not need to make you feel crazy for asking the question. They engage with the question. They sit with it. They consider whether the observation has merit. The person who needs you to doubt your own perception is the person whose operation depends on your perception remaining cloudy. And the moment your perception clears, the moment you see the behaviors for what they are and hold the seeing with confidence rather than doubt. The manipulation has been structurally defeated, not because the manipulator changed, because you did. Machiavelli would say this to you right now if he could sit across from you and speak directly. He would say, Trust what you see, not what you are told about what you see. Trust the pattern, not the explanation for the pattern that the person creating the pattern provides. Trust your perception, not the doubt that was installed by the person whose operation requires your perception to be uncertain. The perception is accurate. It has always been accurate. The only thing that was missing was the confidence to hold it without the doubt that was being manufactured specifically to prevent you from holding it. Let me tell you something about why this final behavior is the one that keeps you trapped longer than any of the other 6. The first 6 behaviors cost you position, energy, and peace. This 7th behavior costs you something deeper. It costs you your trust in yourself. Because when someone makes you doubt your own perception, when they gently, warmly, caringly suggest that what you are seeing is not actually there, you are not just losing the argument about this specific situation. You are losing your relationship with your own ability to read reality accurately. And once that relationship has been damaged, once you have internalized the doubt deeply enough that it becomes your default response to your own observations, the manipulator does not need to manipulate you actively anymore. The doubt is doing the work for them. You are second-guessing yourself before they need to say a word. Machiavelli would look at this and say something very direct. He would say, the most devastating thing any political opponent ever did to a capable man was not to defeat him in battle or outmaneuver him in negotiation. It was to make him doubt his own judgment so thoroughly that the man's subsequent decisions were governed not by what he actually saw, but by the uncertainty about whether what he saw was real. That uncertainty, installed deliberately, maintained through repeated subtle pressure, reinforced every time the man tried to name what he was observing, and was met with the warm, caring suggestion that his observation was the product of his own anxiety, is the deepest form of control available in any human dynamic. My friend, here is the truth I need you to carry out of this video and never set down. Your perception is accurate. The pattern you have been sensing is real. The confusion you have been feeling is not a sign that something is wrong with your judgment. It is a sign that something is right with your judgment and that someone has been working very hard to make you believe it is wrong. Stop believing them. Start believing yourself. Because yourself is the only observer in this dynamic who has no agenda other than seeing clearly. And seeing clearly, held with the confidence that your perception deserves, is the end of the manipulation. Not because the manipulator stopped, because you started trusting what you see. And a person who trusts what they see cannot be managed through doubt. The doubt has lost its grip, and the grip was the only thing keeping the pattern in place. Comment, "I trust what I see," if that just gave you permission to believe what you have been sensing for a very long time. My friend, let me close this out by saying something that I need you to carry with you beyond this video. These 7 behaviors are not rare. They are not the province of criminal masterminds and movie villains. They are operating in ordinary relationships, in ordinary workplaces, in ordinary social circles, in the ordinary daily interactions that you move through, without ever considering the possibility that the person across from you is managing the exchange rather than participating in it. Most of the people who display these behaviors are not evil. Many of them are operating from patterns they learned so early and so thoroughly that they do not recognize the patterns as choices. They are doing what they know how to do. And what they know how to do happens to be the specific set of behaviors that produces compliance, obligation, self-doubt, and the chronic, low-grade confusion that keeps the person being manipulated inside the dynamic without ever quite understanding why leaving feels so difficult. Machiavelli would not ask you to hate these people. He would ask you to see them clearly, because seeing clearly is the only defense that works permanently. Every other defense, boundaries, consequences, confrontation, can be outmaneuvered by a sufficiently skilled operator. But the person who sees clearly, who can identify the gathering, the time generosity, the disproportionate memory, the obligation construction, the temperature shifting, the covert pressure, and the perception doubt installation as they are happening, is the person who can never be fully managed again, because the seeing has changed the game. The manipulation that depends on being invisible has been made visible, and visible manipulation is not manipulation anymore. It is just behavior. And behavior, once you can see it for what it is can be responded to with the full weight of your genuine, clear-eyed, non-manipulated judgment. That judgment is yours now. Like this video if any of these 7 behaviors name something that has been operating in your life without you knowing the mechanism behind it. Share it with someone you care about who is still inside a dynamic they cannot quite see. They need this more than they know. And subscribe to this channel because the next video goes directly into the specific responses that neutralize each of these 7 behaviors in real time, the exact words and moves that make the manipulation stop working, without the manipulator ever knowing you saw it coming.